on to this week's topic. Our topic is representation. So what we're going to do first off is focus more on representation and South Asians with regards to people that we idolize. So celebrities, people in music, film, radio, sport, fashion, all that type of stuff. So talking first about how this actually came about, the reason why we decided to talk about this week is because at the start of this week, some rather damning statistics came out. They were released by a collective called South Asian Audio Creatives, and as part of those statistics, they showed that 19 out of the 25 mainstream radio stations in the UK didn't have a single South Asian radio presenter across their whole schedules. I think the max was one of them, I think it was Talk something, had like 3, but the average was between 0 and 1. So first off, I'm just gonna ask you guys, why do you think that is?
I think it's a sort of thing about putting yourself out there that we don't have a lot of encouragement when it comes to like creative outlets and kind of being out there and speaking widely about certain issues, pop culture, like relevant issues, politics, that kind of stuff. I feel like there's not a lot of encouragement in our community to get out there and do that. I think even when I started this show, you said to me, like, would you have applied for this role? And I said, no, I wouldn't have, because if you hadn't reached out to me, there's no way I would have, because it wasn't something that I thought I was able to do. And just thought, like, that's not me, that's not what, like, that's not normal for me, that's not something that I'd be encouraged to do. And even when I was, like, telling people, they'd be like, really? Radio? Like, what? Like, no one really, like, no one really got it. So it was just kind of, I think it's just a reflection of that it's not massively encouraged in our culture.
So when you're saying people didn't really get it, are you referring to people like within your culture rather than everyone? So it's like people
Yeah,
okay.
Like, I think people saw it as a very random thing. And like, why?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
What about you, Ben? Why do you think that is?
Do you know what? Like, it's weird because growing up, and we'll probably touch on this when we get to the academia side of it and all, but for me, when I approached this role, it was also because this is kind of what I saw myself doing, and I kind of built this sort of frenzy of annoying myself so much to the point that I will do something just because I can. And it's also like a little bit of me where it's like I want to prove people wrong a bit because, like you say, it's not something that's kind of heard of in our culture. And like, yeah, there's like people like Rita Chakraborty or Naga Munchetty on the BBC, and a fair few other Asian presenters, but not many. And I guess one of the main reasons that is because no one's really been like, do you know what, go and do it. Yeah, you go and be a radio jockey, or you go like when I told my dad this like a few years ago when I was planning on doing radio and like being an apprentice for the radio before I tried to go and get into medicine or to even do film at that point, he was like, why does my son want to be a radio jockey? And I was like, first of all, radio presenter. Second, I actually have nothing else to say, but I actually want to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is something I want to enjoy, and like, I gave my chances and I gave my tries, but I think it's strange because Simran made a point of saying, like, so, if you mentioned it to your friends, I'd be like, wait, what? Why do you want to give your opinion on radio? Like, why do you want to put it on DAB? Like, are you okay? Like, but again, it comes down to like, why not? Why can't I? And I think if you've got that burning desire to put your voice out, and if you like talking as much as I do, like, you've got to put it somewhere.
Otherwise you'll implode.
Yeah.
So, obviously those stats speak for themselves. But do you think anything actually needs to change? Like 100%. Obviously you could like see those stats and be like, that's just the way it is. But do you think anything actually needs to change? 100%. And if so, what or how?
I think it does, because when you're having conversations surrounding really important issues like within the culture or within politics or within like general society and stuff, when there's not representation from a really significant ethnic group, then you're just missing out on that whole perspective and it's not being heard at all. So having more people of South Asian background in those roles would provide such a different outlook and get that side out way more. And like when it comes to stuff like, say, in politics, like say for example using the Punjab farmers as an example, it would get out so much more, and it would kind of brick the echo chamber-ness of it all, and it would kind of get that awareness out there so much more for like really important issues that obviously need spreading.
Yeah. And I guess it's also like pretty much like Simran said, it was just like you kind of want to see people like you elsewhere,
Yeah.
so you can feel like you can do this,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
And that's
representation.
how it starts. Yeah, with representation, you see people that look like you. You see people offering a perspective that is the same as yours, and experience that's the same as yours, and that would inspire the younger generation to go ahead and do that.
I mean, that kind of leads on to my next question, which was going to be, why is representation important? Just because obviously I feel like if you are so used to seeing people that look like you around you in media, you're not going to necessarily recognize the need for it. So if one of you could maybe just explain what is the actual need for representation?
I think representation is so important, because I think especially for young kids, and from my perspective for females as well, I think when you grow up and you don't see anyone that looks like you don't see anyone with the same skin color or your features or your dark hair or anything like that, and you don't see that, you don't feel like what you look like is normalized. And then I think you grow up with a lot of like beauty trends or like things in the culture and fashion and music, and you kind of adopt a certain way that you're supposed to act, and obviously that's not true. There's not a certain way that anyone's supposed to act. And when you do have representation and you do see people that look like you, it benefits your self-worth and your self-confidence so much, to a point that you just feel accepted again, and it feels like, yeah, I'm fine, like my features are fine, like, oh, my big nose is fine, or like this is normal, it's not something that needs to be changed. Because I think some things and some trends and perspectives and like beauty and fashion trends and things like that, they're so Eurocentric, they're so westernized, that when you don't have that representation, you grow up believing that's the norm.
I saw a tweet like literally yesterday actually, and it was all these women of colour basically realising that they're not ugly. It's just that the standard of beauty isn't it's white centric. It's not. So moving on, I want to talk a bit about music. So especially in regards to the UK, but also just the general music industry, how do we feel representation of South Asians within that is?
It's starting to make a dent. I think it's starting to get somewhere. Even if we look back as early as the early 2000s, like we had Jay Sean, man.
Yeah.
Good old Jay Sean, if you're
Doing
listening.
it for us.
But do you not think that speaks volumes, though, the fact that it's just like Jay
One
Sean
guy.
and then silence?
So true. And I feel like that is kind of the meme, isn't it? Like it's just like, oh yeah, that one token brown artist, like Jay Sean, he did that.
Yeah.
But I think now we're getting to a point, like, you know, there's household names, like you got like Nav, Steel Bangles, Savak, like there's all those kind of people that a lot of people are starting to recognise as really big artists. Like Steel Bangles charts all the time, like with pretty much every song he makes.
And you're hearing all these places like people from London, and I know for a fact that people from Birmingham, there's like so many people across the countries. I know I saw a couple of years ago, I was just going through my Instagram feed and one of my friends posted a picture of an artist who was definitely Indian. And I was like, oh, okay, so there's more musicians out here that look like me. I was like, this is great news for me. And obviously I was like, yeah, this is fantastic. I forgot his name, but like still, like the fact that there are people out there. And if you look at Ravina as well, like she's coming out, she's coming through. Like there are so much talent. Like there is so much talent just in our little small island of people. So I know for a fact that we just need to be looking a lot more, because I think at this point we're not looking properly.
Yeah, and I think as well, there's kind of this expectation. Like obviously, there's BBC introducing, and that's a really good way for artists in the UK to kind of get into the industry. And whilst I suppose it can kind of play to our advantage in that we have a specific route to go through, there is kind of this expectation that any young Asian artist that wants to make it kind of has to go through BBC Asian Network. And I don't think this is a really bad thing, because obviously it's kind of it's a bit done us a bit of a favour, because it's kind of like we can kind of jump the queue a bit and go through that. But at the same time, why is it
just through the Asian?
We have to go through that.
I don't think you should have to appeal to your Asianness to make it, kind of thing. That shouldn't be your market all the time. Like if you want it to be, sure, if that's you, go ahead, do your thing. But if you want to make it in any industry that you're in, don't appeal to the fact that you're a South Asian person,
like
just to make it, kind of thing. Yeah.
Like Jay Sean again, God bless his soul.
We talk about him a lot.
I know. It's just I want to know him personally, you know. But like the fact that he again, he was an R&B singer,
Yeah.
So people took him as an R&B singer at face value, not brown person / singer.
No, and I can personally speak on that because growing up from a mixed household, from a Western household, I remember Simran, you were saying about how you grew up listening to like Jay Sean and Rishi Rich when you were younger. Like, I didn't have that upbringing. I wasn't really exposed to much South Asian culture. So I only knew Jay Sean from Down.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, like, I hadn't seen the music video. I just kind of knew the song and I was like, oh yeah, I know that song. Just hearing his voice and hearing the song, I just presumed he was black. Like, literally, it wasn't until like a few years later that when I actually started like properly engaging with South Asian music through an active decision of my own. I was like, wait, Jay Sean is one of us. What?
He's brown? Yeah. And he a funky brown boy?
Penny dropped.
Exactly. I like that. It was a pleasant surprise, but also, again, I keep on talking about this webinar that I went to like a few weeks ago, but honestly, it was really useful.
Yeah.
And Bobby Friction, who is a radio presenter on BBC Asian Network, he actually said something that was really interesting. And I think you can go and watch it on YouTube, actually, but the quote is basically that he said, no one wants to be Asian, basically. If you ask a white person, would you rather be anything other than white? The majority of them will say no, because there's an obvious privilege that kind of comes with being white. And if they do want to pretend to be something, they'll immediately pretend to be black, because black is, quote, cool, basically. It's like the cool thing to be. Asians are kind of stereotyped in their own little thing of being like bottom of the pile, basically the losers. Like, no one wants to be Asian. And it's just kind of like, it kind of puts us in such like a rabbit hole to like, it makes it really hard to actually navigate the industry when you kind of got that working against you. Do you know what I mean? What do you think about that?
I have a story for this. So obviously, you know, Uni Bristol, whoop whoop, listeners. At this time, when I was at uni, there was like this. It's a really random conversation, and this doesn't really always ever happen. But there was one conversation with this girl at the smokers bar, and like just like, you know, everyone's going out and just wants to have a bit of a chill, and like it's cold and it's nice. I don't know why, but like England's just cold, but like we do it because it's sweaty inside like the clubs or whatever. And she was like, "You're quite cool for an Asian boy, aren't you?" He was like, "You're not very nerdy," and I was a bit like, "Sorry, do you want? Is that like a congratulations? I don't get it. Like, what do you mean?" Like, I was like, do I not look like Raj to you? Which is, do I need to be in Big Bang Theory? Do I need to put on an Indian accent just to make you feel comfortable?
That's another example of the representation that we do have. That's obviously not working, because it's like, if you're not Baljeet from Phineas and Ferb or Apu from The Simpsons, you know, Baljeet, like, where do you fit in, kind of thing. And that's not what being an Asian is like.
Yeah.
So that's why I think we do get kind of rabbit holed a little bit into that kind of bottom of the pile kind of mentality, because we've always been seen as the laughing stock, I guess, in a sense. But I was going to come and say that, like, if you asked me would I want to be anything other than Asian, I'd say no, because I love being Asian. I think it's great. But that has come after years of finding my own representation, seeking it out for myself, you know, like following Instagram models who are Indian, who are Sikh, who are Punjabi, that kind of stuff. And it's come from like your own kind of internal conflict that you have to get over yourself, I think, coming up as like an Asian person in the world we live in today. And trust me, it's taken a long time to get there, but I feel like now I'm at a point where I can say like, no, I actually love it. Yeah.
I mean, interesting, because like for me, it was more like, for my exposure of people, I mean, obviously out of the South Asian community, but for me growing up, I grew up in a white neighbourhood. I went to a black school. Mum and dad are both religious, so again, I ended up going to two churches. Ended up being atheist. How funny is that? But again, I went to a white church and a black church. Now, it's strange because I did also very much sort of meld in quite well with the black church, but I just as well melded in quite well with the white church. But the part of me was like, the part of me that was missing was my Asian side. And every time I did go to this Asian church, because of, you know, family get-togethers, there's always some auntie just who wants to talk you down, or like something that goes on, and it always gave me some like sort of negative vibes. So like for a while I was a bit like, I don't really fancy being Indian. Like, not like didn't want to, because I was like very much aware of every morning that I woke up that I was brown and I was also Indian. So I didn't forget my culture, which was a big part of who I was. And I very much am proud of the fact that I'm dual heritaged in this case. I'm just as much English as I am Indian. And I think sometimes when you get targeted from both sides, oh, you're not too English or you're not too Indian, it's like, I'm just me. I'm not calling myself Indian and I'm not calling myself British at this rate. I'm just me. Like, it came from a long time of like, I'm not adhering to anyone's like expectations of me anymore.
Yeah.
And so for me, the confidence came from accepting my Asianness as just a form of my upbringing, because I spent a lot of time with my mum and dad. You know, they instilled me with these values, these cultures, these important values of respecting your elders, like even if they were annoying you or like whatever, just having that side to it too. But for me, having my own self-confidence wasn't looking at shows like Big Bang Theory. I actively knew at the ages of 14 and 16, I was a bit like, this is a bit naff, man. Like, I'm not like this guy. I'm sporty. I play music. I'm definitely not that clever. Like, I'm not book smart, but like, I don't know how these things kind of even attribute to me. But that's when I started wondering, is there better representations? Like you had, I don't know if has anyone watched Heroes?
No.
There's an Indian actor, again from similar places to where where my mum and dad originally are from in India, and he looks relatively similar to me, like curly hair, dark skinned, and that to me was the first time I saw someone who wasn't like nerdy. I mean, like he was a doctor on screen, but I mean, other than that, but like he was cool. He was intelligent. He wasn't like shy. Couldn't speak to girls or like it's like that kind of stuff. Just always made me feel weird. Yeah. So for me, it was like finding the right, like you said, finding the right kind of role models, and finding the right kind of role models goes across the board. You want to be proud of who you are because you're gonna have to face up to it every single day. You can't be ashamed.
I think it is like this. There's almost more that you have to do. Like, I think it counts for like the majority of BAME people, but with regards to just South Asians, Hassan Minhaj actually did a lie detector test, and it got uploaded to YouTube, and part of that clip is actually really striking. He said, he's talking about his friend basically, and he said Dax is part of a thing where in show business there's this whole movement of approachable white dudes, whereas with men of colour it's like Idris Elba, Henry Golding, Zayn Malik, or you work in IT. There's no middle ground, and I think that's so true. Like, for example, you basically have to meet again these white standards of beauty that we talked about before, or you're cast as an IT or a terrorist. Like, for example, I think if you talk about representation of brown people in TV, I think one of the places you go to is like Homeland. And when you think about Homeland, I know so many people who love that show, but you can't deny, like, it does amplify some pretty Islamophobic stereotypes, and like it's not doing any good for that community at all.
Yeah.
And it's just a shame that you kind of have to go. Those are
the ones you are.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem, that the representation we do have is not helpful. It's not positive, and it doesn't show us in a good light. So that's why getting representation out there that obviously is constructive, shows a positive side of things, and shows that BAME or South Asian people in particular can be anything and can be in any role, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to be in STEM, you don't have to be a doctor or a lawyer. Like, you can literally do what you want. And that's when I think you'll see real change and growth from people and more of us in every sector.
Like, don't get me wrong, you are going to be questioned a lot.
Yes.
And you are going to be, like, if you plan on doing music or acting or whatever, the one thing you've got to remember is the only reason anyone's going to talk you down is because they're not doing it. And if they're not doing it, doesn't mean you should stop. Like, you have to, I know there's always a case, especially if your parents are like, Beta, what are you doing? Is this right for you? And like, you know, all you need to do is be like, Mum, trust the process. Or Dad, I know this is tough, but give me time. Give me a year, give me 2 years, just let me get it right. But be dedicated. Don't put your foot off the gas. Like, because if they say yes, that's a huge level of trust that they have on you to achieve it. So I think on that, it's a balance of the two things. You have to be able to like bring back and completely dedicate yourself to the cause. If it's what you want to do, you have to chase it.
But once again, I feel like it comes back to the encouragement thing. Like, there just isn't any encouragement from people
100%.
when they're growing up to be like, okay, you can do actually what you want. Like, you can go into music if you like, go into acting, go into fashion, go into art, go into painting, do what you like. There isn't kind of a massive encouragement of creative media outlets for us, and I feel like it does get pushed very much towards STEM routes and the academia route and like the education route, and you kind of go through it and you don't question it because that's what your parents have told you to, and they don't really give you another option to kind of say like, oh no, I want to play guitar, or I want to like go into sketching or something. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't really happen. So I think when you start opening up those avenues to your kids and you let them kind of understand that they don't have to go down the school route forever, and there's so many more options out there, and just do what makes you happy, that's when you'll start seeing more of us in those roles.
Picking out fashion from that, I didn't have personally that much to say on it, but one thing that stood out to me with regards to representation of Asian people in fashion, first of all, I found a statistic that said, it was from 2016, so I'm not sure how much has changed in the past 4 years, but it was from the spring 2016 fashion adverts, only 4% of the models were Asian, like 70-something% were white, basically. And also that I think there is a problem in that not just South Asian people, but patterns and wear from everywhere around the world is constantly taken and crafted upon by Western fashion experts. And you know what, sometimes they create stuff that is very visually appealing, but the problem I think comes with where they'll take, for example, a traditional South Asian wear, but then won't have brown people model it and won't credit them or won't give any sort of recognition to the meaning that traditional wear has. And it's just sort of like you kind of take those elements of that culture, use it for your own gain to profit from, and then just forget it. Like, it's just so, I see all these outfits of like with turbans on and saris, etc. Like, and it's like it's very clearly taken from South Asian culture, but there'll be all these skinny white models wearing it, and it's just the case that obviously that's like fine in the right cultural context, but that isn't what's happening
when it's appropriation to a completely different ballpark. And I think it's a huge problem even within the black community, Asian community, even when we look at like say Japanese wear and you know, and I think it's in Mexico where a lot of people, not Mexico, sorry, oh, God, it must be, I think it's LA where there's a lot of Mexican Americans who live there, having a lot of problems with people in Japan for sort of taking this sort of La Chico vibe and sort of taking this sort of cholo kind of like inspiration and not really crediting this culture that the Mexican Americans have kind of created for themselves, like this sense of community. And I think when people in Japan are like sort of profiting from this without really understanding the lifestyle of a cholo or someone who lives this kind of like hard street life, it's kind of a spit in their face, if you know what I mean. I understand there's always like, you know, with the correct cultural context, it's completely fine. And it's like, do you know what, it's kind of flattering. But like you said, if these fashion designers are taking turbans or bindis or you know, even like a couple of years ago I started seeing people, I think when I was like still at school, I started seeing bindis around and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, especially at festivals.
The Coachella.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, good on you, it looks great, but like, wait, hang on a second, what? Like, you took the piss out of me for like, or my mum for wearing one. Like, what's going on here? Do you know what I mean? But I think it's such a fine line. I don't know about you, Simran. What do you think?
But it's like, I think it's when you're not taking the time to kind of understand and appreciate the kind of cultural significance that underpins these trends and the fashion and the stuff like that comes with it, then it definitely becomes appropriation in the terms that you can't go around wearing it. Because if you weren't Asian, for example, and you was at Coachella in a bindi or like a sari or something that resembled like Asian wear, why is that like praised and okay and like really like bigged up when I might do it and someone might hurl abuse at me in the street? Do you know what I mean? Like that just doesn't make it okay. It's not fashionable when it's like it's only fashionable when there's like a European person wearing it, not when the person that actually belongs to that culture is wearing it. It just becomes like, oh, then you're like a freshie or something. Do you know what I mean?
You know, I'm kind of tempted to wear a Salbar kameez just for the sake of it now.
Yeah.
Just walk around into town and be like, hey.
Traditional wear Saturdays. You're all coming next episode.
Honestly, when Tier 2 comes out, I'm going to be in a club, or like the pub, probably not a club, more like a pub. I'll be wearing my Salvar kameez and I'll be like, are you sure you're allowed to drink that? Do you know what I mean? Like, it'll be fun.
Dear me. Right, before we play a few more tracks, the last segment that I wanted to talk about was sport.
Yeah.
Now, I had a few statistics here. Whilst we know that racism in football, especially in the Premier League, is still a major issue. But with regards to representation, a quarter of the players in the Premier League are actually consider themselves to be black.
Yeah.
Can you guess what percentage of them are South Asian?
Say 1%.
I don't know the percentage, but I know there's like 4 current players in the Premier League that I know are South Asian.
0.25%.
I should have just figured that part out.
Insane.
Yeah. And I looked in, there was an article in The Guardian about like why this is, and they're saying a lot of it is, or they think the reason for it is to do with like conceptions about the Asian body. And you think about it, there's this kind of stereotype that the South Asian body is sort of like weak, or they're not very good at sport, they don't have good coordination, that sort of thing. But I'm just kind of like just thinking about that, and it's just kind of like, I feel like BAME people in general have so much more endurance, I feel.
Yeah.
Then, because if you think about what people have been through and what their ancestors have been through, they've been through so much trauma, so much movement, having to like move shop and go elsewhere, like basically be refugees sort of thing. And the amount, it's just like the audacity of these most of the time white British people in positions of power to kind of see people as weak when they're not weak. And if they are appearing weak, the reason is because your great-great-granddad robbed all their country resources and they didn't have anything left. Like,
Oh, God.
Do you know what's crazy about this? Because, like, I mean, I used to play a lot of sports at school and I did really well. So I don't, like, that part, that's a very jarring statistic. And to think that this, I knew that that was part of the issue when it came down to, like, why they didn't take players and of South Asian heritage. But the fact that there's 4 players, like, in the Premier League, that is, not even the Premier League, there's 2 players in Germany. And the other 2 players are in England. Like, it is kind of crazy to me, because it's like, how does one sort of, I guess, dictate how strong someone else is? Like, do you sit and watch him play football? Like, you didn't even put him onto the scout team. You didn't even put him on the reserves. You've not even decided to scout him from watching. You've just kind of completely outlined him, just sidelined him completely.
I was going to say, it must highlight an issue in the selection process,
Yeah.
because I'm sure there's more than enough young Asians coming up through the academies and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But I
Yeah.
think when it comes to being actually selected and drafted for the teams, maybe that's where the problem is.
Yeah. You know what's mad is as well, I looked in, because have any of you read Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race?
Kind of.
What do you mean kind of? Right, if you read snippets of it or something, yeah. In there, Rennie talks a bit about football, and this isn't to do with players, this is to do with managers. But in America, for the NFL, they basically did this thing called the Rooney Rule, and it's basically where they there was no obligation to have any sort of prejudice in who you hire, sort of thing, but it was basically just a quota that they had to consider at least a certain number of I think it was black referees or black candidates before, so at least then they were considered, not that they had to hire them, but they were considered. And they actually found out after 10 years after that came into place, it did improve representation in terms of the I think it was referees with regards to NFL players. They suggested bringing that in here with the Premier League, and they were and over football, and they were having none of it. They were literally what's the point? This is ridiculous. And it's literally there's such an aversion, to actually just trying to make this any better. You know what I mean?
But I think it's the big thing of like, I think we've seen especially in sport and especially this year with the Black Lives Matter movement, that there was such a big aversion to even admitting there's a problem in the first place. So many people didn't want to admit that football's racist. Do you know what I mean? And even now they've put out like the Black Lives Matter on the little, I don't know what they're called, the sideline advertisement section bits. People had a problem with that on the shirts. People had a problem with that. Like, people just didn't want to admit that the industry is racist. So I think when they kind of brought that idea over, the reason why they probably said no is because they didn't want to seem like, by acknowledging it, they probably would have had to acknowledge the racism.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Like, not, it's mad. Like, there's denial and then there's ignorance, and this is just, it shows a lack of care. And it's both denial and ignorance at the same time.
Which is worse.
Which is even, like, it's just like, it's crazy because, like, you know there's a problem, but you're not accepting it. And you're ignoring it because it's like, it's not your problem. And, like,
when you're in a position of power where you could help others, but you're just choosing not to.
Yeah, no, it's just, it's kind of a grating one. Like, it's just, it could be easily solved. Do you know what I mean? Like, you spend so many years on this earth, and there's so much money spent on like campaigns, getting people to sort of, you know, stick together and unify them together, but the message just isn't strong enough apparently. Like with kicking racism out of football, even earlier this week, players recently actually walked off of the game.
I saw that.
Yeah, and like that's crazy.
Yeah, wasn't it because
a referee said a racial slur?
Yeah, he said that black guy or something, and you would never say that about. Yeah.
Talk about the player's name. He's earned to be there.
Yeah,
yeah,
literally.
precisely. He's worked his whole life to be there. You're not going to refer him by his skin colour.
Yeah.